Some breakups don't happen with slammed doors. They arrive as quiet edits, a profile photo changed, a phone that stops ringing, a sentence that used to be softened by love now delivered without any lace at all. I have learned, on Prince Edward Island, that what survives is not always what blooms the brightest, it is what is tended at daybreak when no one is watching. If you've ever walked a field in May and pushed your boot into red earth still holding last night's cold, you know that care has a temperature. I have kept a farm and a tea room alive through storms that forgot to ask permission. I thought that meant I could keep a relationship alive by the same mixture of attention and patience. It turns out people are not rows of tulips. They do not come back because you know when to water them. Sometimes they cut the hose and tell you to stop trying. My name is Eileen Marchand. I am 60, a widow, and I run Marchand's Field and Tea on the edge of Charlottetown. Down a road where dust behaves itself and drivers lift 2 fingers off the wheel to say hello. The land is 5 acres of tulips and perennials and sensible herbs. With 2 greenhouses, a packing shed, and a small tea room that seats 16 when we move the extra chairs out of the storeroom. I live above the tea room in an apartment that still smells a little like cinnamon by morning even when I scrub the counter twice. The sign by the lane is white with green letters because green forgives mistakes. Peter, my husband, painted it the year before he died. And once a season one touch up the M because wind insists on reminding a woman what she cannot control. I set the kettle at 450. I put on my boots without looking because the floor remembers where my feet end up. I step outside and listen to the pumps on the drip lines hum themselves awake. The greenhouse reads its truth on a thermometer I trust more than the news. I note the temperatures in a log because temperature and honesty behave alike. They only help you if you write them down. I walk the rows that will be open by Canada Day, pink and cream and red, thick with promise that makes you forgive 1,000 small chores. I have 2 part-time helpers, Maddie, who is 19 and saving for community college, and Pearl, who is 67 and still stronger than sense. Together we cut bunches for the church and the nursing home. And on Thursdays we bundle stems with brown paper and string because brown paper makes flowers look like a plan kept. At 11 the tea room opens. There is nothing fancy there. Tea in real cups, small sandwiches, shortbread that does not apologize for butter, and scones forgiving enough to survive a beginner's oven. I keep a food safety plan in a binder beside the till, fridge logs. Sanitizer test strips taped into a pocket. A list of suppliers, the kind of paperwork that looks dull until the day it keeps you from crying. At the end of a day I reconcile the HST. Total the squares in the till tape. And sign my initials in a bottom corner no one sees but me. I like that the proof exists whether or not anyone cares. My daughter, Sophie, lives in Montreal. She is 32 and sounds like the modern world when she wants something. She studied communications and learned how to make a sentence do tricks. She moved away at 19 and spent her early 20s working every job that taught her to arrange other people's attention, hotel promotions, charity galas, travel content under skylights too clean to have cooked under. When Peter died, she came home for a week and stood in the doorway of the packing shed like she might catch grief if she crossed the threshold. She cried when it was time, then left a card on my table that said, "We're our own weather." I kept it because you keep things your children make, even when they are paper and wind. The first talk about helping the farm modernize came last year. She flew in for a long weekend in May and walked the rows in shoes that did not deserve the soil. "It's beautiful," she said, camera up, eyes moving, mind racing. "We could do weddings. Small, tasteful, 2 nights only. Or golden hour photo sessions, sell 20 tickets and set up a Prosecco cart. People will pay for the mood. I said what land always says when asked to do tricks. We have rules. Agricultural zoning here is not a suggestion. You can sell what you grow, you can host the community when it needs you. You cannot remake a field into a stage just because a sentence looks good under it. She sighed like I had failed a test. Mum, she said, you're thinking small. A few launches, a few sponsors, and suddenly you don't have to wake up at dawn to cut stems. I said, I don't wake up at dawn because anyone makes me. I wake up at dawn because tulips don't cut themselves. She went back to Montreal with a head full of plans and a phone full of photos. I stayed and did the patient work. Summer brought tourists who needed something to hold after realizing that the island's quiet would not speak first. We made more scones. We learned how to say, no. We don't host weddings, in a tone that felt like offering something else instead of denying what people had invented in their heads. We donated bouquets to the care home. We tied ribbons for the church when someone needed to be buried. And we fed tea to teachers with faces that had done a year too long. The thing that broke wasn't loud. It rarely is. In early spring this year, when the ground still had the stubbornness of late freeze and the wind had not yet decided to be kind. Sophie texted me a link to a video. She had overlaid footage of our field with words she liked, Harborlight Meadows by Sophie Marchand, coming soon, sunset sessions. Curated gatherings. Our name was not in it. The land looked like it belonged to a brand I did not recognize. I called her. The call went to voicemail. I left a message in the slow, careful tone I use when a delivery driver is lost. Darling, I saw your video. The field is still my field. We can't do events. Please call me. She did not call. Hours later, a text arrived. Boundaries. Mum, please don't micromanage my work. I'm building a future that isn't stuck in the past. I wrote back, I'm building a tea room that keeps people alive. She sent a thumb up as if I had answered a question about weather. I went down to the greenhouse and pinched the basil. Because if I didn't do something that smelled like being useful, I might have cried into the soil. The week that followed was a case study in quiet cruelty. The website login I share with my nephew who built it years ago beeped at me like a conscience. When I opened it, the banner had changed. Sophie Marchand Events, arched across a photograph of our field taken from my kitchen window. The contact page listed a new email and a phone number that wasn't mine. Our About page had been rewritten so that my life looked like an origin story for someone else's ambition. It wasn't even mean, just tidy. I clicked and felt a kind of shaking begin somewhere behind my ribs. I called my nephew. He said he hadn't made the change. But I showed Sophie how to get in the back end last summer when she wanted to fix a typo. He said, I asked him, can we revert? He could. He did. I changed the password and wrote it on a piece of paper with a pencil like a woman defending a castle with a spoon. Then the bank did its little job of telling me the truth. A pair of charges hit the supplementary card I had kept on the account because being a mother once made me confuse access with love. One was for a set of macrame backdrops and poles shipped from a warehouse with a name that sounded like an apology. One was for a portable bar unit, the kind that advertises itself as perfect for barn weddings. The third, smaller, was for a stack of golden hour tickets, test print. None of these purchases looked like scones. I called the number on the back of the card, placed a hold, and wrote the amounts in my ledger in a hand that had forgotten how to be kind. I sent a message. These charges are not authorized. I have frozen the card. Call me. She did not. An email landed instead. The subject line, for the record. The body was clean as glass. I am setting clear boundaries. Please stop contacting me about my business decisions. Do not call. Do not email. Do not use money as a lever. I will not be guilted into smallness. From here on out, I'm responsible for me. Please respect that our relationship is over unless and until I say otherwise. It ended with her full name and a phone number under a signature that made my child look like a stranger. I did not answer. I made tea. I sat at the small table in the apartment and looked at the field that had let me be a person for 40 years. I remembered the winter after Peter died when the light went out on the oil tank and I learned to coax it back with a screwdriver and a prayer I did not know the name of. I remembered the year Fiona flattened a corner of the greenhouse like a careless hand and we opened the tea room the next day anyway to pour hot water for neighbors who needed the shape of a mug to remember they were held. I remembered the time I sold Peter's old truck to keep Maddie and Pearl paid through a spring when tourists chose elsewhere and the church still wanted altar flowers because someone had married. Someone had been baptized. Someone had died. And the earth insists on being marked even when the ledger shakes. I looked at that email and understood it meant to make me the villain in a story that loved itself too much to ask for facts. When you are a woman who has kept a place afloat, you learn to grieve while standing up. I carried the grief into the office and did what I do when the wind starts lying. I made a list. The top of the page read facts. Not feelings because feelings aren't wrong. They are just poor administrators. Under that, I wrote the legal name of the business. Our HST number. The land title reference. The insurance policy's declarations page. The payroll register. The food safety inspection report. And the service contract for the drip pumps. Each item got a tab in a red folder I had bought for taxes and never taken seriously as a friend until now. In another column I wrote the list called What I Paid For, Sophie's tuition. Year by year. With notes about residence and winter coats. The deposit for her first apartment when she called. Crying. The flights home. The Christmas rush money I transferred when she said a client hadn't paid. These are not debts legally owed. They are the ledger a mother keeps so she doesn't write a poem where a policy should be. I called the bank manager whom I know by name because small towns believe that names make people behave. I asked to remove all supplementary cards and to enable 2 signatures on any transfer over $500 and to set up alerts on any e-transfers. She did not ask me to justify myself. I slipped the confirmation letter into the red folder under bank the day it arrived and let the paper hold my worry while I went to bake. There are sentences that are meant to be told later in a kitchen. I found my strength, and I was braver than I knew. There are others you do not fit to a monologue because they belong to the moment you lived them. A week after the email, Sophie called from a blocked number. I answered only because I still answer every phone that rings like it might be someone who needs me. Her voice had that professional softness someone teaches you in a course about conflict. "This is to inform you," she said, "that I'm moving ahead with a rebranded event series. I won't be using your name. I am entitled to my future." I listened to my own heart refusing to become a gong. "You are entitled to your future," I said. "You are not entitled to mine." She hung up. The line went quiet like a field in winter. Grief changes shape depending on whether you handle it or it handles you. I chose to handle mine with cloth and pen. I ironed the cafe curtains because clean edges make rooms behave. I polished the glass case where we keep the lemon squares because lemon demands better light than grief. I wrote a polite, firm email to the web host, attaching the business registration and asking them to revert any unauthorized changes or risk being complicit in misrepresentation. I wrote to the craft rental company whose bar unit had been charged to my account and explained that the purchase was fraudulent. Then printed the bank's dispute form. I cleaned the sink trap because sometimes the only way to feel less small is to make something dirty into something useful. If you live here long enough, you understand the way news travels, fast among people who need it, slower among people who prefer to mind their own business. My sister-in-law, Paulette, learned from a cousin that Sophie had posted a story calling me controlling and saying I was financially manipulative for canceling cards. I did not try to correct it. I might have once. I do not audition for my own character anymore. I wrote 2 things on an index card and taped it inside the red folder. If someone cuts you off, let them. If someone takes your name, put it back on paper. Late one afternoon, the field held that light that makes it hard to remember why anyone would choose a city. A car pulled in and a couple in their 30s stepped out, joyful and chewing on a plan. "Is this the place for sunset tickets?" they asked. I felt my face move in a way I don't like, and then I put it down on the counter like a person setting a heavy tray. "We don't sell tickets for the sun," I said. "But we'll give you tea and you're welcome to sit by the fence and watch God do what she does." They looked confused, then grateful. They bought 2 scones and sat quietly for an hour, and when they left, they put $5 in the donation jar for the nursing home flowers and wrote, "For Beauty," on the envelope. I slid that envelope into the red folder under Community because you should keep proof of the times your principles did not cost you friends. A week later, the local farm association sent out a notice about the Harvest Open Day in September. Each member could host a small table to share what the land asked of you this year. I read that line twice. Land asks, we answer. I sent back a reply. Marchand's Field and Tea will participate. Our table will display history and rules, how we stay open without becoming something else. It felt dramatic when I typed it. It felt like oxygen when I hit send. Pearl came in early the next morning and found me flipping the closed sign back to open because I had left it the wrong way by mistake. Which is less like me than I will admit. She put down her bag and watched me measure tea leaves like it matters how much I care. "You're allowed to be tired," she said, the way a person says, "There's rain," when the roof has already learned to hold. I smiled with my mouth and kept going with my hands. "I'm more than tired," I said. "I'm done being drafted into someone else's pitch deck." She nodded. "Good," she said. "Put it in writing." So I did. I wrote a page called House Policy and used the old office laminator as if it were a printing press that could make a woman less erasable. The page said, Marchand's Field and TEA, House Policy. We sell what we grow and bake. We do not host weddings or commercial events. No sunset tickets. The sunset is free. Commercial filming by prior written agreement only. Supplier contracts and bank transfers over $500 require 2 signatures. In storms and power outages, tea is free for first responders and elders. We serve quietly. Please speak kindly to staff. I posted it inside the tea room by the door, beside the certificate that says our water is what it claims to be. I printed smaller copies and taped them where staff could point to them when someone's hope turned into insistence. And then, because policy without proof is just a good mood, I booked an appointment with a lawyer in town who has hands that look like they have held more letters of administration than cups of coffee. I need to update my will, I told the receptionist on the phone. And I need to do it in a way that sticks. We can do that, she said, in the voice of a woman who enjoys paper for all the right reasons. The last time I saw Sophie in person before the line went silent was July. She stopped by unannounced, which used to be my favorite kind of knock. She stood in the doorway in a dress that would have been happier 10 degrees warmer and said, I wanted to see the place before summer ends. I poured tea. I cut a scone. We stood in the kitchen and looked at each other like women who might have been strangers if you didn't account for the time and trouble we shared. She told me her work was going well. That clients respected her boundaries. That moving away from family entanglement had given her clarity. She used the words of a therapist without the warmth. I told her the basil was behaving itself and that Maddie had learned to make shortbread. She looked around, eyes softening despite herself. It smells like childhood, she said. It smells like butter, I said. And we both laughed like that might be enough. It wasn't. Before she left she asked, as if remembering something at the bottom of a list, whether I had thought more about legacy. I said I had. She brightened. And then I said, I think legacy is how a place stays what it is. She rolled her eyes the way girls roll their eyes when a mother refuses to become a cliché for a story they're writing. You don't have to punish me, she said. I wanted to tell her that what I was about to do was not punishment. It was a fence put up before someone else fell into a ditch. But I didn't. You can't build while someone narrates over your hammering. She hugged me stiffly and left. And I stood in the doorway and watched her car dust its way away and let the ache arrive and leave without offering it tea. In the evening, after the last table had been wiped and the chalkboard washed, I pulled the red folder out and added a new tab, Will. Under it I put a list of questions for the lawyer. How to remove a child as a beneficiary of the business while keeping a modest bequest for decency? Can a no contest clause be enforced here? Could we create a community trust to hold the land so that even a charming argument could not turn it into something it isn't? Who should be trustee if not me? Could Emma, my niece, learn the bookkeeping and the basil? How do I write a letter of wishes that explains a decision without turning it into a weapon? I thought I would weep then. The way films teach you a woman should at the edge of a big decision. I didn't. I made lists. I made a second pot of tea at an hour tea does not deserve and I drank it anyway. I wrote down, in pencil so I could erase if I was unkind, every sacrifice I had made to keep this place alive. Selling the truck. Taking the line of credit to replace the oven when it died without confession. Working doubles through the first spring after Peter died because grief didn't stop the kettle. Paying Sophie's tuition and her rent. Wiring money on a December night when she said a client had not paid and the landlords where she lived do not care about context. Covering payroll during Fiona just so Pearl and Maddie would not have to take their worry home. None of this entitles me to my daughter's love. It entitles me to make sure my life's work is not redistributed by someone who thinks rules are rude. I took a pen and wrote a sentence on an index card and taped it to the inside of the red folder's cover so I would see it when I opened the spine and felt braver just for having letters to look at. Love is not an unlimited line of credit. Boundaries are love written down. I have been the kind of woman who forgives early and often because that is how I was taught to keep peace. This time, the peace I mean to keep is the kind that lets a room open on time to people who depend on it. Next week I will take the red folder to the lawyer and sit in an office that smells like paragraphs and do the work that will look, to some, like cruelty. I will call the bank and make the 2-signature rule part of the day instead of a reaction to one. I will inform the insurer that no events are permitted on my land and ask them to say it back to me in writing. I will send a note to the Farm Association to say that our Harvest Open Day table will include a policy posted for all to see. And I will keep watering the tulips and kneading the dough and serving tea to people who do not need to know what it cost me to decide this. There's a lot to do between a sentence on an index card and a clause in a will. Here is where I leave this part of the story. At the edge of a field that will bloom again whether or not anyone thanks it. I will not shout. I will make appointments. I will sign letters. I will put my name where it belongs and remove it from places where it has been borrowed without permission. And when the harvest open day arrives, I will stand by a table covered with brown paper and photographs of this place doing exactly what it does best and speak clearly about what we are in. Perhaps more importantly, what we will never be. Some plans aren't born loud. They start as a pen uncapped before daylight. A kettle settling on the hob. A list written on the back of yesterday's deposit slip. People imagine resolve looks like a speech. Out here it looks like block letters on a manila tab. I don't know when it became unfashionable to say that paperwork has saved more small lives than inspiration. But I have proof in a red folder that sits on the office shelf like a spine. After I decided to change my will, I did not ask the sky for permission. I checked the cooler, tied on my apron, opened the tea room on time. And then I began to make a future that would not collapse if the wind developed opinions. I started the day the way we always do on this island when we mean to do something difficult, by completing something ordinary. The greenhouse sat at 14 degrees Celsius. Respectful as a church mouse. I wrote the numbers in the log. Sucked my teeth at a leaf spot on the basil. Adjusted the oscillating fan. And set the drip to a pace the soil could interpret without fuss. The rose out back had woken into that late summer green that makes August forgive July. I cut 2 buckets of tulips before the heat could preach to them. Set them in the packing shed sink with clean water. And then went upstairs to wash the earth from my wrists. When I'm nervous, I clean like I expect company. The lawyer did not know she was walking into a house that had already been told by lemon oil and diligence that nothing rude would be tolerated. Her office smelled faintly of dry paper and the kind of professionalism that does not need posters to introduce itself. She has the hands of a person who has set many signatures in the places where they do the least harm. I set the red folder on her desk and my coffee on a coaster. Because I respect furniture even when it is not mine. She listened while I told the story in the dull, exact way a nurse writes vitals, dates, amounts, the language of Sophie's emails, the unauthorized charges. The website banner I didn't recognize. The message that declared our relationship over on terms I had not been asked to read. When I finished, she nodded the way a person nods at a storm they can name by the sound of it hitting the window. "We'll do 3 things," she said, drawing squares with her pen. "First, a new will. Second, a letter of wishes to explain the will to any human who deserves a human sentence. Third, prepare a trust you can execute now or later, ownership and operating rules so strong a brand deck can't move them with charm." She slid a sheet toward me labeled instructions and we worked line by line. I gave her the legal description of the land, the business registration, the HST number, the payroll count, the equipment list I had written for insurance purposes. She asked who I trusted. I said, Pearl for cents and Emma for numbers, and she said, "Then those are your trustees when the time comes." She asked if I wanted to cut Sophie out entirely. I surprised myself by saying no. "There will be decency," I said, "but not leverage." We wrote a modest specific bequest in the will, something a court would not call spite. The business, the land, the tea room, the greenhouse, the equipment, the recipes, the name, all of that would pass to the Marchand Community Trust with conditions. The farm stays a farm. The tea room stays a tea room. No weddings, no ticketed sunsets, no alcohol service, no commercial filming without written agreement and proof of insurance naming us as additional insured. Room for a scholarship for horticulture at the local college. A requirement to feed elders and first responders during storms without speeches. She read back each clause in a voice that made even kindness sound enforceable. Then she carefully explained a no contest clause. what it can and cannot do under pay law. How it dissuades litigation by making the remaining gift vanish if the beneficiary sues and loses. It isn't a trap, she said. It's an honest sign on a fence. I signed where my name belongs. Hand steady. Because when a woman has been called controlling for controlling the only thing she can control, a clear signature is a kind of defiance. We drafted the letter of wishes in the language I use when I'm writing recipe cards for Maddie. Simple. Complete. Useful. I wrote that estrangement was chosen by my daughter. Not provoked by me. That my duty to this place includes keeping it itself. That love is not an unlimited line of credit. That I had supported her generously as a mother and would continue to wish her thriving. Just not in a way that would dismantle the thing that keeps other people fed. The lawyer revised a phrase here and there. Removing heat. Keeping truth. We printed it on paper that felt like it would survive a drawer and a decade. On the way home, I stopped at the insurance office. The broker, a man with the posture of a choir boy punished by actuarial tables, printed an endorsement that stated what my bones already knew: no coverage for events, tastings, or mobile bars on my property. Coverage continues for what I actually do. Additional insured certificates available for the rare non-commercial filming by prior written agreement only. He underlined the policy numbers like he was arguing with the future on my behalf. Tape it to the wall, he said, smiling with one side of his face. The side that believed in women who read their policies. At the bank I asked for a second letter confirming what I had already set in motion. 2 signatures on transfers over 500. No sub-users. Alerts on all e-transfers. A note that the supplementary cards had been cancelled at my request. Not due to fraud. I could not stop. I want this in black and white. I said. I am the owner. I set the rules. The manager nodded like a church elder agreeing about a hymn choice. She printed the letter with a satisfaction that suggested she had seen this kind of love before. Back at the farm, I tucked the new papers into the red folder under tabs that made me feel like a person whose life had decided to stop apologizing. Then I returned to the work. It is a truth I will not stop teaching. The field doesn't care about your drama. The basil needed pinching. The traps needed checking. The tea room needed lemon bars. The walk-in needed to be exactly 2 degrees when I wrote it down. Pearl arrived 6 minutes early because she doesn't like arriving inside a minute. And we portioned scones and opened the door and let the day come in. I had expected silence from Sophie. I had expected anger. What arrived was marketing. A post went up on her page with photographs of other people's fields implying they were mine. Then another with the edge of our greenhouse visible if you knew where to look. The captions were clean and passive. The owner prefers tradition. And then the comments bloomed into the usual weeds. Some mothers fear success, and older generation gatekeeping. The kind of sentences people write when they are bored of themselves and want to rent your life for a night. A friend of hers messaged our business page, accusing me of being financially abusive for canceling cards. I typed a sentence I learned at a farmer's market 10 summers ago: we don't discuss private matters in public forums. We do, however, serve tea. Our policy is posted by the door. Then I closed the laptop and washed the cups because the only way to make a room behave after the internet has walked through it is to give it soap and routine. At the end of that week, the Farm Association sent out details for Harvest Open Day. I registered for a table and wrote the words history and rules in a script I reserve for labels and apologies. I printed copies of our house policy and set them beside a stack of photos of the field in every season: sweet June, exhausted August, the red stubbornness of October, the faithful blank of February. I didn't intend to make a scene. I intended to build a backdrop made of fact. Some confrontations look like arguments, mine looked like errands. The licensing office confirmed in an email that agricultural zoning did not permit event conversion without a hard public process I had no interest in starting. The environmental health inspector dropped in for a tea and bought a scone. Then signed a routine check slip and wrote, "Owner understands sampling boundaries," in neat pen. I taped that beside the sink. I ordered more brown paper because brown paper calms a room the way a hymn does when the sermon has gotten ambitious. I asked Maddie to practice saying, "No events," with a kind face. She did, and then convinced me to add a line. "But we do have a bench that loves sunsets. And we'll lend you a blanket." When the registered mail slips came back green with the craft rental company's signature and the hosting platform's compliance, I put them under a tab called C&D with a satisfaction that felt close to sleep. The rental company reversed the charges. The platform reverted the banner. I did not gloat. I made shortbread and sent a box to the nursing home that buys bouquets from me when they can afford it and accepts them when they can't. It would be dishonest to say the week carried no ache. Grief remains a houseguest who quietly pays for nothing and still expects a folded towel. I watched mothers and daughters navigating the tea room and felt something raw in me reach for a phone that I will not dial. I stood by the field at dusk and listened to frogs volunteer a soundtrack and considered every mistake I must have made to raise a child who thought she could declare us over with a signature line. Then I took the shame I could not use and put it somewhere safe, inside the act of weeding, and I let the neat row say on my behalf, "I am not failing." 2 days before harvest open day, a letter came from Sophie's address in Montreal. The envelope had the anxious neatness of a person trying to look older than her intentions. Inside, a short, professional note from a law firm I didn't recognize. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was a letter before formal correspondence. A phrase I will never forgive for its cowardice. It asked for clarity regarding anticipated inheritance, and used the word expectations in a way that made me taste tin. I took it to the lawyer. She looked at it like a teacher receiving a note folded into an airplane. "We'll reply after harvest," she said, with the will's new summary and an invitation to seek independent advice. Dry as biscuits. Nothing to argue with. She then reminded me what I had asked her to remind me: we aren't punishing. She said, "We are placing the work where it won't be dismantled." The night before the open day, I set out the tablecloth for our display, brown paper with clean edges, a vase with stems in the 4 colors that tell the truth about our year, a tray of small scones labeled "Not for Sale," copies of the policy, a photo of Peter painting the farm sign. I added the health inspection report, the bank letter, the insurance letter, and a 1-page summary of the trust draft. Not for debate, only to show that I was not making this up to impress a crowd. At the last minute I put the letter of wishes into a plastic sleeve and slipped it under the table to hold my nerve. That letter has become a place I can rest my mouth when my heart tries to run. Morning arrived fair enough to make me suspect I had done something right. The field had the calm of a classroom before a decent lesson. We opened the gate and people came, neighbors, strangers. The woman from the post office whose eye can find you on the worst day and make you believe the mail still matters. I told the history of the farm the way you tell how to graft a branch, briefly. With a knife that knows where to cut. I explained the rules as if they were recipes. Here's why it works. Here's how we keep from poisoning anybody. Here's what you can substitute when you are out of patience. People nodded. Some told me their own stories, their sons with apps they don't understand. Their daughters with ideas too grand for a countertop. I handed them the policy printed small enough to slip into a wallet. Show this to yourself when someone says you're old-fashioned, I said. It helps. Midday. Sophie arrived. She came with Marco and a woman with a camera that cost more than my first car. They were dressed for a field that staged itself and had misplaced the part where dirt happens. Sophie's face tried to quiet itself and failed. I'm here as a guest, she said, voice professional to the point of brittle. Of course, I said. You can be one. She moved to the display table and read the policy. Her mouth made a shape that remembered me. You really did this, she said. I really did, I said. The camera woman asked if she could film a candid moment. I pointed to the line on the policy about commercial filming and to the sign-up sheet for permission requests. We do many things for free, I said. We don't do that. I will not pretend it didn't hurt when she turned away. I will not confess a stoicism I did not possess. I breathed like a woman who had lifted empty trays in winters when grief weighed more than bread. I poured tea for a couple who remembered me from a storm and told myself the oldest truth I know: if you keep doing the next thing, eventually a day becomes a life again. Late afternoon. The Farm Association chair fetched me for the small microphone they set under the maple to thank donors and ask for volunteers. She pressed it into my hand like a clean towel. Say something about your table, she said. People love to know what's actually true. I do not use microphones when I can use a ladle. But I used this one for 8 sentences. I said that a farm is a contract between land and calendar. I said that our tea room is not a stage. I said that the sunset is free and always will be, and that if anyone tries to sell it to you, they will sell you other things that don't belong to them. I said that I had updated my will and was building a trust so that what feeds us would not be interrupted by a rebrand. I read one line from the house policy: we sell what we grow and bake, and watched an old man wipe his eye with the back of his hand. Which is my favorite kind of applause. After, a woman in a blue cardigan I recognized from the care home took my hand and squeezed it with the grip of a person who has pulled many people out of chairs that didn't want to let them go. Do what you must, she said, but don't stop sending flowers on Tuesdays. I won't, I said. The trust will require it. She laughed at the phrase require it like it was poetry. Out here, paperwork is our poetry. We closed the gate at 5. The field exhaled. Pearl swept the packing shed as if it had offended her. Maddie counted the donation jar with solemnity and wrote the number twice so we wouldn't tell a false story later. I took the red folder from the display and carried it back to the office. On top of the papers I laid the letter from the lawyer prepared for Sophie's counsel. A plain summary of the will changes. A reminder that she should seek advice of her own. The no contest clause quoted without relish. The trust's conditions described in language so dull a flare could not catch it. I am not naive. A letter does not teach a child to come home. A policy does not make a heart bend. But I have learned too much from tulips to confuse what I want with what will grow. You prepare the bed. You plant the bulb. You water. You wait. And you accept that not every root chooses you. Even if you have loved the soil with your whole life. That night, when the tea room had settled into the kind of quiet you can hear, I wrote a new index card and taped it under the first. Love is not a bribe. Keeping a promise to a place is not a betrayal of a person. Tomorrow I will take the letter to the post office and then to the lawyers to sign the final draft of the trust. The day after, I will update the website with a small page called How We Work so I can stop answering the same question with a speech. Sometime next week, I will stand in front of this town at the fall church supper and read one paragraph that will look like an announcement but is really a blessing. That Marchand's Field and Tea intends to continue to be exactly what it is. Without apology. Without events. With an open door and a kettle that minds its own business. I don't know what Sophie will do. People like to end stories with reconciliations that make the ache worth it. I have a different ending in mind. It isn't dramatic, it is durable. I will put the trust to paper. I will put the policy by the door. I will put the flowers where they are needed. And if the final chapter asks me to read these words aloud at the church hall with the microphone that thinks it knows me, I will do it with a steady mouth. The truth does not need to shout when it can be notarized. Some endings don't announce themselves. They set the table, straighten the cutlery, and wait for you to sit. I used to think closure would feel like a door slamming, loud, decisive, something a neighbor could testify to later. It turned out to be a laminated page by the tea room door and a signature witnessed by a woman with neat handwriting. The week after Harvest Open Day, when strangers thanked me for telling the truth plainly and friends hugged me like I had carried something heavy without making them watch, I realized I had been living with the ending and only now had the manners to recognize it. The first weekday after Harvest, I took the red folder to the lawyer and signed the trust deed. It didn't feel dramatic. The pen had weight, the paper had grain, and the room had the pleasant, tired confidence of a place where people make decisions and then escort them into the world. We read through the final clauses. The land and business transferred to the Marchand Community Trust. Use restrictions spelled in language even a storm could not blur. No weddings. No ticketed sunsets. No alcohol service. No commercial filming without written agreement and proof of insurance naming us as additional insured. A spending rule that made generosity ordinary. Flowers to the care home every Tuesday. Tea free to first responders and elders during power cuts. A scholarship for a local student pursuing horticulture. 2 trustees now, me and Pearl, and 1 successor trustee named Emma, pending her training. There was a line that will comfort me when memory grows less obedient. The house shall remain a tea room. I initialed the margin there. Not because anyone asked me to, but because sometimes a woman writes her name beside a promise so the promise doesn't get lonely. We signed the will as well. The lawyer read the witnessing formula with the patience of someone who respects ceremony where it holds people together. The bequest to Sophie was modest and unconditional, a sum that would cover a fresh start but not purchase my life's shape. The no contest clause followed. Not like a threat, like a fence. If she challenged the will and lost, the bequest would vanish by its own terms. We tucked the letter of wishes behind the will, my words about love and limits and the duty of a place to remain itself. I did not cry. I steadied the pen and felt the particular relief of work completed without applause. On the way back, I stopped at the post office. The clerk knows our address by heart and the way I look when I'm doing something I wish I didn't have to. I sent a registered letter to the Montreal firm that had written on Sophie's behalf, a civil summary of the new will. The trust's broad terms, an invitation for her to seek independent advice, and the line I had practiced until it fit in my mouth without breaking it: I will not discuss inheritance further. The clerk slid the tracking receipt across the counter with a small, sympathetic thump that sounded like a lid set on a pot so the soup can settle. At home, I posted the new policy page on our website. It wasn't user experience so much as a public conscience. House rules. Why we don't host events. How to ask to film, the answer generally being, don't. Sometimes, send a letter, what we do in storms. I added a photograph of the hand-painted sign Peter made because photographs can carry behavior if you ask them to. Maddie checked the links and nodded with a satisfaction I have come to trust more than praise. The community did what communities do when something honest has been said aloud: it went on living. And it kept an eye out. The priest came in for tea and told me the church hall would welcome any overflow during winter storms. The care home nurse left a thank you note with 5 lines of handwriting that made me straighten my back and keep my word. The Farm Association shared a short post on their page. Open Day Highlight, Marchand's Field and Tea explains how we stay ourselves. It is a particular grace to be noticed and then immediately returned to yourself. Things were quiet for 4 days. Then the phone rang with the number from the Montreal firm. I did not want to answer. I answered anyway because I have not learned how to let a phone decide who I will be. A junior lawyer with a tidy voice asked whether I would consider mediation to repair expectations. I told her the will was signed. The trust was executed, and any conversation would be with papers present and people acting like adults. My client is concerned about reputational harm. She tried. And I said the most peaceful sentence I have taught myself this year: we do not discuss private matters in public forums. She thanked me in a voice that sounded like failing politely and hung up. Sophie sent an email 2 days later. It didn't flare, it chilled. I saw the post. She wrote, "I understand you've made a decision. I disagree with your framing. Please remove any insinuation that my plans were fraudulent. I will not pursue inheritance. I will not be contacting you again." The last sentence did not land like a threat. It landed like weather I had already dressed for. I replied with 3 lines. I have removed nothing because I have named nothing. The policy is about the house, not you. I wish you safety. Then I closed my email and scrubbed the sink. The chrome shone. The room behaved. There was still the church supper. The unofficial town parliament where people perform their competence with casseroles and jokes they haven't had time to write. I had been asked to speak for 2 minutes about resilience, because our booth at Open Day had sent a rumor into the parish that I knew how to keep a room from becoming a stage. The night smelled like coffee and onion and floor wax. Which is to say fellowship. I stood by the kitchen window and watched the line form: boots. Flats. Sunday shoes rescued from a closet, while Pearl arranged lemon squares in rows that would comfort a mathematician. The chair tapped the microphone. People sat. We sang a verse of "For the Beauty of the Earth," because the earth remains the only sincere reason I know for a song. Then she introduced me with the kind of generosity that makes you want to tell the truth. I walked to the podium and set the red folder down. Not to wave, but to anchor. I did not bring my will. I brought the policy and a photograph. 2 minutes, I said, and the room laughed the way rooms do when they are hoping you mean it. Here is what we've learned at Marchand's this year. A farm is a contract between soil and calendar. A tea room is a promise that whoever comes in will leave warmer than they arrived. Neither of those is served by chairs on a lawn with a rented bar. There were smiles, there was relief. So we wrote it down. When things are written down, they are not an argument anymore. They are a practice. We posted. We sell what we grow and bake. We do not host weddings. The sunset is free. And then we kept feeding whoever shows up. Especially when the wind decides to be mean. I held up the photograph of Peter painting the sign. In our first year, my husband made a sign that told the truth about us. I am trying to be a sign like that. Not loud, durable. I closed the folder, returned to the table, and felt my lungs do that quiet, grateful thing a body does when it has not betrayed you in public. After the supper, one of the counselors shook my hand and said nothing useful, which is the only way a counselor should speak at a church supper. The principal of the elementary school asked if the scholarship could include kids who want to study landscape design. I said yes because the point is to get hands into soil, not to guard borders. A teenager with a shy mouth told me she liked the way our policy sounded like common sense. I told her common sense is just courage that's had time to settle. We loaded dishes. We returned chairs. The hall returned to quiet. and the night apologized for nothing. I won't catalogue all the small consequences that collected in the weeks after. The sponsor who had once courted my daughter messaged to say he respected our boundaries and would send a case of non-alcoholic mixers with clean labels and no expectations. The case arrived with an invoice showing a discount, not because we are charming, but because we are tidy. We placed the bottles on the retail shelf beside the jam, and they moved at the pace of real life, slow enough to feel honest. A travel blogger passed through, asked about sunset tickets, took a photograph of the laminated policy instead, and wrote a short paragraph on her site about why small places deserve to keep their shape. 2 couples came for tea because of that paragraph and sat quietly with the kind of gratitude that buys shortbread without asking how much butter is left in the world. Not everything softened. Sophie's final email did not evaporate, it hardened. That is the work of goodbye, every time you don't pick it up. It becomes easier to leave on the shelf. I thought of her often. In the useless ways. Which mugs she would have chosen. Whether she would have laughed at Pearl's joke about the basil thinking it was Italian. How she would have described the taste of August air to strangers. I let myself think of these things. And then I returned my mind to the room because the kettle had not grown a conscience and the ledger needs numbers or it tells lies. The only real flair came from a man who messaged to tell me I was withholding generational wealth and afraid of innovation. I responded with the standard line, "We don't discuss private matters in public forums. Our policy is posted by the door." He pushed. I muted. Muting is an underrated spiritual discipline. You can hear your own life better when the static stops pretending to be a station. Winter eased itself into the conversation halfway through October. We folded the patio chairs and stored them in the shed with the patience of people who have outlived impatience. The field went bare and beautiful. The greenhouse kept a small fire of green under plastic. An ordinary miracle. We continued to deliver flowers on Tuesdays, mums. Then pine boughs and 3 white roses for each wing of the care home because winter asks for less color and more intention. When the first gale chewed the power line down the road, we lit tea lights and the room filled the way rooms fill when it's very dark and nobody wants to say they are afraid. We poured tea free for elders and first responders as the policy requires. It wasn't charity, it was manners. On the 1st of November, the bank's monthly letter arrived with its plain confirmation. Dual signatures in effect. Attempted transfer held until second approval provided. Sub-user access none. I initialed the bottom and slid it into the folder under bank with a gratitude that does not require adjectives. The insurance renewal followed later in the month. The broker had added the endorsement language we wrote together, no events. No tastings. No brand activations. And I signed it with the pleasure of a woman who has turned chaos into line items. The licensing office sent their annual note reminding license holders that incidental music is not a loophole. I placed it under license and imagined the clerk who printed it. Her calm doing more good than most speeches. By Advent, Emma had started coming on Saturdays. She learned the till with a seriousness that made me want to buy her a calculator for Christmas. She balanced the square against the paper tape and reconciled the HST with the patience of someone who knows that accuracy is a love language. Pearl taught her to test sanitizer strips. And I taught her to listen to customers who don't know which words to use for what they need. We showed her the trust deed and explained what successor trustee means in a tone that made it sound like an invitation. Not a burden. She cried quietly and then asked if she could practice making shortbread. She can. It is always good to know who will remember a recipe when you're tired. The letter from Sophie's lawyer never turned into a lawsuit. I do not attribute this to justice. I attribute it to the dull power of clarity. People sue when they smell confusion. We did not give off that smell. Our reply had been plain. Our policies were posted. Our paperwork made it clear the land was held by a trust now. Not a mood. If there is any advice smuggled into this story, it is this: if you don't want to fight, make it boring to fight you. I promised a reflection at the end. Not a sermon. This is it. A child cutting you off feels like misplacing your name. There is a humiliation to it that makes a mother want to negotiate her own dignity away for one more phone call. I stood at that edge longer than I care to admit. In the end, what steadied me wasn't the idea of revenge. Revenge is a young person's sport. What steadied me was the shape of work done right. The bank letter that gave numbers a chaperone. The insurance endorsement that kept my room from being dared into risk. The trust deed that moved my love for a place out of my chest and onto paper that will outlive my stubbornness. The policy by the door that lets a teenager answer a pushy request with a smile and a finger pointed at a laminated sheet. If the word "will" sounds harsh to you, I understand. It sounded harsh to me too until I realized the sentence hidden inside it. This is what I will and will not allow. A mother's will is often mistaken for control because it is the only tool we are allowed to wield without being called dramatic. But the will I signed is not a punishment, it's a map. It tells the people who love this place and will love it after me how to keep the tea hot and the prices fair and the chairs pointed toward each other instead of a backdrop. It tells the community that they can trust us to be dull in the best possible way. I have not reconciled with Sophie. I do not know if we will. I will set an extra place at Christmas anyway. Not because I want to be a martyr, but because setting a place costs less than bitterness. If she comes, there will be tea and a scone and no talk of wills. If she doesn't, we will eat the scone and still deliver flowers on Tuesday. I will keep the rule I wrote on an index card when I didn't trust myself. Keeping a promise to a place is not a betrayal of a person. If she ever wants to learn the basil or the till, I will teach her. If she wants to sell the sunset, I will show her the laminated policy again. And then I will ask her to carry chairs. There isn't more drama to give you. There is only the last scene a story like this deserves. The tea room at dusk. Empty and kind. The window fogged with the day's ordinary labor. The red folder thinner now because I turned fat worry into flat paper. The sign by the lane catching the last light and refusing to become fancy. I locked the door, turned the "open" sign to "closed," and stood for one extra minute in a room I have loved more stubbornly than is fashionable. Love has failed me in places I could not fix by cleaning. But here, love is rules kept and dishes dried and a kettle that goes out in all weather. If this steadied you the way a clean counter does. Like this story. If you want more quiet, stubborn tales about mothers who keep rooms honest with policy and ladles. Subscribe. And comment. Have you ever had to write a rule to save a relationship, or a place? What did your sign say? Who signed your letter? If any of this rang true, share it with someone who thinks a microphone is louder than a will. There will be another story when spring puts its hand in the soil again. I will be here, early, with the kettle warming and the policy by the door.